The purpose of the project is to learn a new skill and become familiarized with the changes that are not only developed in the performer, but the adjustments that are associated with the improvement of the motor skill as well. Michaela, and I'm a trainer.
I'm Kendrick. I'm a trainer. I'm right-handed and I have no injuries.
Alexa, and I'm a trainee.
I'm Julian and I'm a trainee.
There are 4 main events in bowling a hook shot. The first event, front stance. Second, end of windup. Third, ball release. And fourth, end of follow through. Additionally, there are 3 main movement phases. The first phase, backswing, occurs the moment the ball is swung backwards from the initial front stance and ends when the ball reaches the end of windup. The backswing phase is the instance in which a bowler can get into the best possible position before the downward motion of the downswing begins. The downward phase starts from the front stance position from the moment the ball starts to move backwards until the ending wind-up position. At this position, the ball is behind the bowler and is raised to its highest point before returning downward. For a right-handed bowler, the arm is extended backwards to almost a 90-degree angle with slight flexion of the elbow. The second phase, or downswing phase, starts at the end of windup and ends at the release of the ball. The purpose of the downswing phase is to generate speed in the forward motion so the ball can travel with enough velocity to knock down the pins. The downward phase starts when the arm is fully extended at the end of windup position, and it leads into the forward swing into the release of the ball. During the downward phase, the ball is moved downward and under the shoulder of the dominant arm. Once the arm is swung past the ankle and towards the ball release position in a straight motion, the wrist must slightly pronate 15 degrees just before releasing the ball. Pronating the wrist is essential to give the ball a curve while rolling down the lane, which helps increase the probability of hitting the maximum number of pins. The third and final phase is follow-through, and it starts at ball release and ends at the end of the follow-through. The follow-through phase is important in bowling because it produces an effective swing direction towards the target after the ball is released. It starts at the ball release position and ends at the end of follow-through position. The follow-through consists of the forward swing motion after the release of the bowling ball, and it should be completed high enough to allow the bowling elbow to rise above the shoulder, which signifies the end of the bowling motion. Before attempting the hook shot, the learners observe 2 peers with prior bowling experience correctly performing the action. After observing a skilled performance, the learners will make their initial attempts at the hook shot. According to Ashford, Bennett, and Davids, observational learning has a positive effect on the learning of a skill for beginners. Observing a skilled demonstration allows the learner to visualize the limb movements required to successfully complete the movement. Ashford, Bennett, and Davids also found that such visualization allows the learner to mentally work through the movements, resulting in any necessary alterations of the motor skill. In our first training session, Michaela and Kendrick demonstrated the proper hook shot technique. Michaela and Kendrick each completed the full task twice. Then, the movement was broken down into phases so Alexa and Julian could fully understand the limb movements required to successfully complete the skill. Once Michaela and Kendrick answered any questions regarding the movement, the trainees attempted the skill. 2 full-speed demonstrations were then given before all other training sessions to remind Alexa and Julian what the movement required. However, The breakdown of phases was eliminated after the first practice session unless requested by the individual trainee. It should be noted that a skilled demonstration was not given prior to the retention test. Augmented feedback was given at appropriate times in order to heighten learning while simultaneously avoiding dependence. Augmented feedback forces the learner to focus their attention on the regulatory conditions of the skill rather than the actions involved in the skill performance. Hurley and Lee discovered that, as the learner pays more attention to correctly performing the skill, there is less focus on the individual limbs needed to carry out the movement. This ultimately leads to increased learning and better performance. According to Wu et al., feedback after individual trials causes a temporary increase in performance when an individual begins to learn a new task. However, frequent feedback was found to decrease learning because the learner becomes dependent on the feedback and the skill performance decreases when feedback is no longer provided. Augmented feedback, namely knowledge of performance, was given initially every third attempt at the hook shot until the learner became more comfortable with the task, which was an average of 7 trials in the first practice session. At this point, prescriptive knowledge of performance was provided only when the learner incorrectly bowled a hook shot. A few examples of this feedback provided are: you didn't rotate your hand as you released the ball, and your follow-through like you're shaking someone's hand. And you're abducting your arm, bring it straight back next time. After the 4th practice session, augmented feedback was only provided to trainees upon request. This slow phasing out of feedback avoided any learner dependence. When learning a fine motor skill, the smaller movements can be the most difficult for an inexperienced individual to learn. McGill and Anderson found that breaking down a movement into slower, simpler phases helped reduce the overall difficulty of the task so the participants can correctly learn all the parts of the movement without distraction. Reducing the movement speed and decreasing the weight of the bowling ball are crucial in teaching the learner how to properly rotate their hand during the release of the ball. This movement is essential in applying the proper amount of torque to the bowling ball in order to produce the desired spin. Renshaw, Chow, Davids, and Hammond found that slowing this phase of movement allows the learner to focus more on the proper wrist rotation and will eventually reinforce a more stable and coordinated pattern of movement. Alexa and Julian first attempted the hook shot with the bowling ball weight of their choosing. Alexa chose a 7-pound ball and Julian chose a 14-pound ball. After a few unsuccessful attempts, Alexa and Julian practiced the movement without the ball in order to better their hand rotation at ball release towards the end of the downswing phase without risk of injury. Once the trainees showed improvement, Michaela and Kendrick instructed them to choose a ball slightly lighter than in the previous attempt. Julian initially decreased to a 7-pound ball, while Alexa had already been using the lightest ball provided in the bowling alley and remained with the 7-pound ball. The decrease in weight allowed Julian to pronate his wrist to the desired 15 degrees at ball release. However, the ball was too light for him to control the hook. Michaela and Kendrick recommended he try a 9-pound ball. Over time, Julian was able to bowl a fairly accurate hook shot with the 9-pound ball. Due to weight constraints, Alexa practiced without the ball, but was ultimately more successful in regards to her movement when practicing with the bowling ball.
That was a good one.
Julian initially achieved the average number of pins knocked down with a slight curve, but was unable to execute the proper angle of entry. Julian's retention test showed a decrease in pins knocked over, but was able to achieve better form. His angle of entry was just 1 degree outside the recommended range, and his form produced the desired curve with the lighter ball. The transfer test was executed by increasing the weight of the ball. Because Julian decreased his weight in the training process to implement simplification, His weight was increased back to the weight of the ball that was used in the pretest.
Doesn't matter anyway.
I'm going like this.
Alexa's initial attempt showed a mere 0.5-degree angle of entry with no pins knocked down and no curve present. Alexa was unable to decrease the weight of the ball for simplification as she had used the lightest ball available in the pretest. She practiced the movement without the ball to compensate for the absence of an alternative weight. Her retention test showed significant learning as her angle of entry was just outside the recommended range and she achieved the average number of pins. For Alexa's transfer test, we increased the weight of the ball by 2 pounds. This weight may have been too much as she was unable to place the ball. However, she was able to achieve the recommended range for angle of entry as well as achieve a slight hook curve. This graph shows the results of number of pins knocked down in the pretest, retention test, and transfer tests. The target number of pins was the national average for a recreational bowler, which was 7 pins. Both bowlers averaged below the target. Julian averaged 5.67 pins with a standard deviation of 1.25, and Alexa averaged 2.3 pins with a standard deviation of 2.28 pins. However, both bowlers also hit the average in one of the tests. This graph shows the angle of entry for the pretest, retention test, and the transfer test. The target angle was the angle recommended by Rich Karuba, a former professional bowler, through his bowling education website, Bowlversity. Alexa and Julian averaged a 2.3-degree and 2-degree angle of entry with standard deviations of 1.43 degrees and 0.82 degrees respectively. Despite what a novice would think, the bowling ball should not be released at the middle of the lane, also known as the 20th board. The ball should enter the lane between the 17th and 18th board, resulting in the optimal angle of entry, which is 4 to 6 degrees. A successful hook shot was determined by the number of pins knocked down, the angle of entry, and the curve of the ball. Our training resulted in positive learning and transfer. Skilled demonstration and augmented feedback were the most effective training techniques. The demonstration allowed the trainees to visualize the proper way to execute a hook shot, while augmented feedback allowed the trainees to problem solve, which resulted in slower performance progression but increased learning. Simplification, on the other hand, was less effective for Alexa in particular because we were unable to lower the weight of her ball. Simplification was slightly effective in training Julian, but he performed better with a heavier ball. Slowing down the movement initially helped both participants understand the limb movements and coordination patterns required to successfully bowl a hook shot. However, adjusting the weight of the ball had little benefits in learning how to bowl a hook shot. In future training, we could use professional bowling balls rather than the standard ones provided at the bowling alleys. The standard bowling balls are provided for amateur and recreational bowlers to bowl and are made to remain in a straight line when thrown. Professional bowling balls, on the other hand, have more traction and a core that allows for the balls to hook more easily. Additionally, the effectiveness of our training could be increased by utilizing an LAP laser, which will allow for more accurate readings of angular displacement. The pretest showed a very small angle of entry due to the freezing of degrees of freedom. According to Bernstein, a learner will have decreased range of motion when they initially learn a movement. In the initial few attempts, neither participant were able to produce the desired curve due to an incorrect motion and angle of entry. However, after prescriptive knowledge of performance and observing both the trainers and each other, they are able to adjust their motion to facilitate the curve unique to the hook shot. Each learner developed a fluid coordination pattern that enhanced their performance.